start off with you, Lindsay. You've done a fair few of these conferences, so you can ease us into the session. Would you like to talk us through your new hotel at Melbourne Airport?
Sure. Look, I think this is a really exciting panel, not because I'm on it, but probably the reason it's not exciting, but I think Melbourne is going through an incredible development cycle, as Karen alluded to. There's just so much happening in this city and so much exciting development happening across the board. I think, if you look across the room, there's just, I've never seen DesignInn so packed with Melburnians and so much work, and I've never heard so many designers being as busy as they are. So I think it's really a sign of the times that so much exciting stuff's happening in this market, and great to have a panel that sort of investigates that from a different few aspects. So talking a little bit about Melbourne and specifically Melbourne Airport, where we're working with the airport out there to develop a combination hotel of a Novotel and an Ibis Styles, which is very exciting. It'll be more than 450 rooms, which is quite a significant increase in the number of rooms in that airport. But obviously for those of you who travel in and out of the airport, as we all do, I think everyone would agree that the traffic certainly demands further hotel accommodation and amenity in the overall development. So certainly what we're looking at and working with Melbourne Airport on is really creating something that's more than just a hotel, but it's actually a precinct, which is, as Melbourne Airport continues its rapid expansion, and it's been a victim of its own success. The growth is quite staggering. Certainly having a hotel with amenity, we'll have 3 to 4 different restaurants and bars in that location, and it will really be something of a destination and placemaking for the airport, which will attract a range of different users, whether it's guests obviously of the hotels, but also conference guests, workers at Melbourne Airport, transient passengers, people picking up friends and relatives. So we see it as really being a placemaking opportunity for the airport, and delighted to be working with them on it.
And can you talk to us through why Novotel and Ibis Styles as the two brands?
Sure. Look, we've done a number of combination hotels in different markets, and what we find is that we're able to stratify the market to provide options to the traveller and allow them to decide what product and what they're looking for. So if they're a corporate traveller, if they're there looking for convenience, if they're an outbound traveller taking their first overseas trip, or catching up with friends or meeting friends and relatives, by having 2 different brands positioned in 2 different markets, the mid-scale and the upper and the upscale market as Novotel's position, it allows the travelling public the choice to make a decision as to where they want to stay. And certainly Novotel and Ibis Styles are very preeminent brands in that market, and certainly are very well tested and proven in the airport market, and also in Australia and in Melbourne. So we're very excited about that combination, and it gives the traveller option, and it gives them choice, and it gives diversity to the airport as well.
And we'll notice that Accor is at a couple of other airports across Australia. Can you talk us through those?
Sure. Look, the airport opportunity has been something that we've been very focused on over the last decade, really. We've seen the opportunity to locate hotels in proximity to airports or on airport land. And I think different airports have taken a different approach to that, and in terms of some airports initially were just interested in selling a block of dirt or doing a ground lease on a piece of land with an operator or a developer coming in to build those. What we're seeing more and more now in the airport space is the airports are actually recognising that they want to own those hotels, and that's a big step for airports who have traditionally been owners of leased businesses or car parks. So for them to move into operating businesses is quite a big move, but we're certainly seeing that across the board. We've got, across Australia and New Zealand, we have some 15 airport hotels. We've got some other airport hotels under construction in Christchurch and Auckland Airport. We're developing a Pullman hotel, which will commence construction later in the year. So certainly it's a market that we think is very exciting. Often each airport will look at the demand or another airport and say, why does that work or why doesn't that work? And I think it's important when you're designing airport hotels that you have to have the end user in mind and really understand what's actually driving the reason for people to be there. Is it truly that there's a curfew involved in that airport, and that means that you just have to stay overnight? Because if you're 4 hours drive from the local airport and you're about to do an overseas trip, you can't just physically get there in time to take that flight. So is it a convenience style offering that you need to do? Or is it a fact that there's business parks co-located with airports, and there's a way for people to come in together to meet. And so there's that sort of opportunity. Is it a conference, a meeting event hotel that's co-located at the airport, allows people to fly in from interstate, intrastate and overseas to meet. So it's really about understanding what are the demand drivers for the airport and what's the total catchment area for an airport hotel, which varies significantly from city to city that we operate in. So it is really, it's not just that worked in Sydney, so it'll work in Melbourne, or that worked in Melbourne, so that'll work in Brisbane. It's quite a unique demand driver, and you have to look and understand where the airport's heading. But certainly what gives us confidence is that, the fact that there isn't a curfew at Melbourne Airport, the commitment the airport has to expanding the routes, both with traditional carriers but also low-cost carriers and new entrants. The airport is just so ahead of the curve in terms of attracting flights, which is great for the broader industry, because obviously if we have really strong airports and really strong flight capacities, then that's only a good thing for hotels, both hotels obviously located at airports, but more importantly, the broader cities that they provide and service. So certainly it's an exciting time in the hotel space and particularly the airport hotel space as well.
Great, thank you. So what's the status of this new hotel at Melbourne Airport? What are they up to at the moment?
So we're working through design development at the moment. So we've been working with the airport for some time. We've got some great consultants on board there. I'm sure some of them are in the room as well. So for us, it's great working with good partners. Melbourne Airport are very keen to do something very different in the hotel space here, and from a food and beverage perspective, really do something quite unique. And so we're working with them extensively on how we can really create sort of Melbourne style and really celebrate the vibrancy of Melbourne's food and beverage at an airport location, really trying to do something quite different, but also allowing the airport, which is a 24-hour operation, to make sure that the hotel can operate throughout the day at an efficient level, but also offer people different offerings from a food and beverage perspective throughout a day, throughout a season, throughout a year. And also we see that the airport hotel is a way of really celebrating what's happening in the broader city. Obviously, Melbourne is the event capital of Australia. It's a great way, people are arriving or coming for events specifically. For the airport hotels to really celebrate those, I think is very important. And broadly, with the development of the airport becoming more of a corporate business park as well, also creates opportunities. So working through design development at the moment, working through the cost elements of that, and making sure that we can create something that delivers the return on investment that Melbourne Airport are seeking.
Great. So we've got a pretty good design team on board. There's Fender Katsoulides for the exterior architecture, Woods Bagot on the interiors, got Irwin's doing the full services component. It's a fairly unique service offering for the likes of an Ibis Styles. Can you talk us through a little bit more of that unique offering?
Sure. Look, really we've taken a blank canvas approach to this. We've really said that the hotel brands are there to position the hotel and the room and accommodation. Today, and we're consistent, I think, across the board with a number of our colleague hotel operators, that really food and beverage is something that's so important to get right. I think the industry as a whole really, probably for a decade, sort of said, oh look, rooms is what we're focused on, we'll let someone else do the food and beverage. Whereas I think two things that have happened in the industry, and you're probably seeing it in each of your areas and projects, but for us what we've seen is certainly social media, and the amount of photography of food and beverage in social media in our hotels is just extraordinary. 1 in 3 people post something about their experience during a stay, and so much of that is food and beverage. So for us not to own and really focus on the food and beverage is an absolute, you just can't operate hotels today and not have a core focus and attention to food and beverage, because your guest certainly does, and they will certainly tell other guests or potential guests about what they think of your brand if you don't get the food and beverage right. So we absolutely have to own that space. The other area, which probably is less relevant from a Melbourne Airport perspective, but certainly more important as Melbourne specifically, is the growth of Airbnb. And certainly Airbnb, we've seen in Melbourne has a tremendous growth curve, given the number of inner city apartments that are owned by investors that people are putting on the hotel short-term accommodation block during days, largely peak periods, but throughout the year. And so certainly one way that hotel operators can fight back and owners of hotels can really focus is offering food and beverage, because that's something that Airbnb doesn't do and something that we can offer and create real experiences through food and beverage. So our focus is absolutely on doing that. When we talk about Melbourne Airport and those hotels specifically, it really is about creating something that is true to Melbourne, and we're going to be working with a number of different consultants in the area to really make sure that we can provide something that's very defining of Melbourne. It has to have exceptional coffee. It has to have amazing food and beverage, fresh food and beverage, locally sourced, and it has to be something that people would stay at regardless of whether they were actually and choose to eat there, regardless of whether they were forced to being located there because there was a flight disrupt and they happened to be staying at the hotel. So we really want something that people will walk from one end of the terminal to the other to come to this hotel to experience the food and beverage throughout the day and night.
Great. So you've got a couple of other exciting projects happening in Melbourne. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. Look, there's a few things happening in Melbourne. I think there's a few artist impressions or renders on the cycle through of the photography, but we've certainly just opened the Novotel Melbourne South Wharf as part of the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre extension. So that's very exciting for us. That's a hotel that's owned by Action Group, which we have a great relationship with. We have two other hotels with them in Melbourne and one in Brisbane, and a relationship with them in the Middle East as well. So very exciting to be opening that hotel. Obviously opening that just at the peak period around Grand Prix was very helpful to open a 349-room hotel at 85% occupancy. Never is a bad thing. So certainly that's an exciting time and it's great for that overall growth of the Convention Exhibition Centre to provide another offering beyond the Pan Pacific in that market. So that's our newest kid on the block. In terms of other projects, we have an exciting combination hotel, Novotel and Ibis, in Little Lonsdale Street with WellSmart Developments, and that will open at the end of the year. That's another 400-plus room hotel. It's the first time we've ever developed a Ibis and a Novotel in a vertical stack. So it's something that's really quite exciting. We've often done them co-located or adjacent, but this is the one tower with the two brands operating within the one tower, which is exciting for us. So lots happening in Melbourne, and working on a couple of other exciting projects that I can't quite talk about just yet.
Okay, fair enough. What about some of the other iconic Melbourne hotels such as the Lindrum and Como? Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Sure. I mean, those hotels have had great history, and a lot of people know those two hotels very well. Obviously, the Como was very much the entertainment hotel in its day, and it still performs exceptionally well. I was out there earlier today, and certainly that hotel continues to satisfy and meet that market demand in South Yarra, and it's a hotel that you'd probably never develop again, to be honest. If you look at the floor plate, you'd never develop something with corridors that are about 4 metres wide. So I don't think any developer would do that in this environment, but certainly it was the place, and there's some beautiful suites in that property, and there's amazing history of the artists particularly that have stayed there over the years. So it still carries that beautiful history about it, and it's certainly a favourite of many people who come to Melbourne. The Hotel Lindrum is a beautiful hotel that we've got the privilege of operating under the M Gallery by Sofitel brand. The hotel really has probably the most personality of any hotel that I've stayed in Melbourne. It's just a lovely, it feels like you're coming home. It's just an intimate environment. It's got a great history, that site, and performs very well. It's a beautiful boutique hotel that really does feel very homely, and it's beautifully designed, and it's a lovely club-style hotel in the market. It feels very Melbourne when you go there. So it's a great hotel.
Wonderful. All right, Lindsay, thank you for that. We'll move on to our next panellist, who is Grant Philipov from Bates Smart. Grant, do your clients ask you to design a project with Melbourne in mind?
I think destination is one of the key elements when we speak with clients. Obviously, there's a number of clients that we have international clients. They're keen to get that Melbourne feel. I think that also, it was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers that when you stay in a hotel in a city, you want the feel of that city as opposed to staying in a hotel that can be anywhere else in the world.
And what do you think are the key features or aspects of Melbourne that you like to bring into your design?
I think my thoughts are obviously the CBD of Melbourne, and I think the architecture on Spring Street, Collins Street, Burke, obviously the laneways and the discovery of the laneways, and I suppose the hospitality, the venues, the restaurants down those laneways. I also think the climate is one of the key features, and makes the, I suppose, interior design and architecture in Melbourne sort of quite different to any of the other cities in Australia.
And how do you go about pitching these to clients to sort of sell that Melbourne story?
It's working with a client collaboratively, I suppose getting an understanding of their brief, requirements, and their operations. And I suppose then, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's probably in their requirements, if they have that request to have that, which most of them do, sort of have that Melbourne sort of influence as part of the design.
Great. Now, Grant, we worked together back in 2008 to 2010. I was probably a very annoying in-house Crown Melbourne project manager, putting you under a lot of pressure. You were one of the design team at Bates Smart, one of a big team. You'll notice that Crown's brought a lot of new hospitality into the precinct to support the hotels, a lot of food and beverage. Tell us a bit more about what you've recently been doing at Crown.
We worked together on Metropole. That was a few years back now. At the time, that was quite, I think it was the largest hotel in Australia, about 660 odd rooms. The hotel was built on the back of the extension to the convention centre to cater, I suppose, for the business market predominantly. Being such a large hotel, we purposely try to make it feel more like a boutique hotel, and that sort of came about by, I suppose, the planning of the building and introducing that curve to sort of shorten sight lines. The other element that we sort of focused on was really the bespoke interior, but also a strong collaborative work with local artists. So we're keen to get as many sort of local artists involved in the interior, and variety, sort of different aspects throughout.
So you can talk us through a couple of those different artists that were involved in the guest rooms and also the public areas?
In the guest rooms, we worked with David Band, local artist, and who produced individual pieces of art for each of those rooms. So there were 600 odd rooms, and each room had a different individual piece of art. David also worked with us. We did the Gordon Ramsay restaurant at the time, which was the main restaurant as the hotel, and we developed with David a frieze which sort of wrapped through the full length of the restaurant, three-dimensional sort of frieze, the brief being sort of the maze restaurant itself. So quite a large sort of installation piece. Ramsay's obviously gone, but the piece of art is still there, which is a good thing. We also worked with a graduate artist from RMIT, I believe it was, who developed for each of the floors in the public spaces, we developed a ceramic crane, sort of Japanese influenced. And then also on the ground floor, I think there was an image in the roll, which quite a large installation, quite a colourful sort of full sort of wall mural by a local artist, Noel Kaczynski, I think it was the artist, yeah. So quite a variety of, I suppose, different levels of sort of artists as well.
Great. And so more recently, you've been doing some pretty exciting project work with Heston. Tell us about that journey.
Also at Crown, so we started working with Heston, well, the Heston team about 3 years ago to design the Dinner by Heston restaurant here in Melbourne at the time that we were appointed. It was just the one restaurant, but ended up being the two restaurants, with Fat Duck sort of moving temporarily here for a period of 6 months while they closed the restaurant in Bray to refurbish it. As part of, I suppose, the initial briefing, we, Jeff Kopilov and I, went to London to meet with the team, get an understanding of their operations and facilities in Bray. They had only the one other dinner, which is in Mandarin Oriental Hotel. So Melbourne was to be the second restaurant for the team. As part of that, it's really sort of getting an understanding, I suppose, of the cuisine. Obviously, the food being the main element as part of the design. The cuisine itself is based on historic English cuisines from the royal courts of Henry VIII through to sort of Victorian era. And there's a strong association with Hampton Court Palace. So it's really sort of getting that understanding, having a look at some of the detailing and concept imagery, I suppose, from the London restaurant. Is also very keen to sort of look back at the past and sort of those royal courts were the ones that sort of invented the rotisserie, jelly, the jelly moulds, and obviously being at Greenwich, that sort of whole association with the Greenwich time and that. So there's a lot of those influences that we used here in Melbourne in the restaurant, but at the same time, as part of the project, we were responsible for the interior and the architecture, which was built on level 3, sort of, it was a podium level, so there wasn't much up there. So we were able to design the facade to, with views over the city. So that was pretty much the backdrop, I suppose, to the restaurant was the Melbourne skyline. Return the glass on either side so that you can look up and down the river. So you're sort of taking in all of Melbourne as you experience, I suppose, the dining environment.
Anything else unique about the design of Dinner by Heston, any of the artwork or any other elements?
We worked with quite a few artists. There are a number of artists that the Heston team work with in the UK that we also used here in Melbourne. One of the artists that we did work with, Rob Higgs, is an amazing artist who did sort of the timepiece, which is in the restaurant. I think there's some images of that sort of running through on the screen. Quite an incredible artist, and I think if you Google or look up The Knife by Heston Blumenthal, there's a video. It's quite mind-blowing of the type of work that this guy does. As part of, I suppose, Heston himself is, it's all about the senses and the experiences when dining in his restaurants. So with the building itself, where you enter the building, there's probably, there's about a metre sort of height difference from the entrance to the restaurant to the dining experience. So we came up with the idea, rather than just doing the steps and a ramp, accessible ramp, we did a 20-metre long ramp to sort of take you into the restaurant. And I suppose it's a space that takes you from the world of Crown to the world of Heston. So it's quite a dark, sort of long corridor. At the top of the corridor, we worked with one of the artists to develop a piece of art at the end of the corridor, which you sort of lead to, but with the corridor itself, it's because of the ramp, it sort of makes you feel as if you're shrinking. So it's very much an Alice in Wonderland sort of experience, which is one of the Heston team's sort of favourite sort of books. And when you get to the top of the ramp, the door itself to the restaurant is on a sensor, so that you're sort of standing there for a while before you sort of walk into the restaurant, because you don't know where the door actually is. And then upon entrance, you find yourself at the show kitchen, which is the main feature of the restaurant itself. It's all about sort of the show kitchen and that experience.
Great. So it sounds like a pretty interesting experience you've had working with Heston on those projects. What other exciting projects in Melbourne can you talk to us through that you're working on currently?
I just got back from Dubai actually. So we're about to do another restaurant for him in Dubai, another dinner for Heston, which will be his third restaurant. So that's a pretty exciting project. It's at the new, it's on the Palm, so it's part of the new Atlantis building, which is massive. So that's one project. We're also, in Melbourne itself, we are currently working on Marriott Serviced Apartments on St Kilda Road as part of the residential development. We are currently also working on a couple of smaller sort of boutique size hotels in the CBD, one being for M&L on Burke Street, which is within a heritage listed building. It used to be the old equity chambers, so there's a strong sort of heritage element associated with that. We're doing a new tower behind that heritage building, but also adding a few floors to the top of that.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've got a great array of projects there, Grant, you're working on, so thank you. I'll move on to our next panellist, Zong Chen, who luckily has a hotel named after him, the Chen in Box Hill. I'll let Zong tell us a little bit about his story of how long you've lived in Melbourne and how this has all come about.
I'm moving to Melbourne about from 2000. Been living here now 18 years now. Before then, from Adelaide. The hotel come about is the relationship I have with the gallery start from 2001, and the RCV Hotel is a curator. One of the curators is Ken McGregor, and in 2014 he come to my studio, asked me a question: do I want to be into one of the RCV Hotel will be named after Chen. Of course, I'm very happy with it.
And where do you draw your inspiration from for your artwork?
Mainly, my background is I'm Chinese, and I'm come here study from my age around 19. So my heritage culture is quite a big influence my artwork. But also because I educate in Adelaide and London, and so I get influenced by like a Warhol, de Kooning, quite a few of the major American and German artists. So my most are working on my art is kind of mix East and contemporary postmodern West, kind of the hot pop kind of thing.
And how did you come to select the particular pieces of art for inside the hotel? Talk us through that process of how it worked.
When I know about, it would be like 3 years ago, they let me know about 3 years before the planning of the hotel. So I have stopped a few exhibitions and working on my studio, been thinking about my art, how to fit in Box Hill, the environment, and so I didn't really have a specific idea given to me, just up to me what I want to do with it. And I have, between 2014 and 15, I created roughly about 50 to 80 pieces watercolor. From the 80 pieces, maybe select around 30 to 40 pieces for image, making a reproduction of a giggly pin. They use useful so entire the hotel in different room and the hallway and the lift. So practically, they didn't really give me an idea. I just do whatever I want. But yeah.
Sounds like a great brief.
Yeah.
There's a few bits of your artwork up on the screen scrolling through. Perhaps talk us through those pieces of artwork and what the inspiration was.
They have inside they have some rooster, some landscape, and some they have some imagery with the darks and also have some modern, like contemporary figure with girls and all mix between the 1 year what I curated, whatever I'm thinking of feel one of pen and we mix with all have some of my traditional like a kung fu, Chinese kung fu and all mixed with different one. So, but they're very bright the color. It's not particularly for the hotel, but during that period, like between the 2008 from now, that watercolor I've been working on is quite bright. So it's happening just that period. My work very colorful and bright green, pink and yellow, and with the black line. And kind of the technique will be got a little bit Chinese calligraphy on top of a very colorful backdrop, and QA fits well, I think, in the interior so far.
And did you have to present these pieces of artwork for approval before they were installed?
Actually, they have a team like between me and Ken and a few team, and they select. They actually take all the image of 55, and then select most of them, 70% of them, to use for the hotel.
Fantastic. And have you been selling more artwork since the launch of the Chen?
Got a show comes up, the price definitely triple.
And if someone sees your artwork, how do they go about buying it? How do you sell your artwork?
From now, most of them I sell through the gallery. Hardly sell through myself, but during 18 years, I got a incredible one in Australian art world, and I have a representative in Sydney, Eva Blue, but they're closing, like passed away, closing the gallery, and most of them, my artwork is sold through the gallery, and from now on it's the same, and hardly if they won't come to my studio, it's hard to talk about yourself to selling artworks.
Now, I understand you have stayed in the hotel yourself. You've stayed there for one night. Talk us through your experience when you stayed in the hotel.
I think when the opening the night, I want to stay there one night, but probably it's a rush opening on November, and the room is quite comfortable and quite for the price it's really clean and comfortable. It just next door that night I stayed there. The noise is quite a lot of noise. So I stay in my own hotel, own lamp hotel. I don't feel so comfortable with it because the next door been fighting for whole night. So I only stay there one night so far.
Very good, very good. I might go to the floor to see if there's any questions for any of our panellists.
I have one here for Lindsay. Lindsay, you talked a lot about food and beverage in the new airport hotel and the experience and the location, etc., to be a destination. But hotels, generally speaking, especially in Melbourne, there's so much more to offer outside, particularly in the CBD. So I'm wondering, even at the airport, why would you not outsource it to people that know what they're doing?
Good question, and it's something that we've worked with the airport on and continue to discuss, and it's certainly something to think about. But I think for us, and I come back to the social media point that I think is really important, because the way the hotel lays out, from a guest experience, they don't really know who operates, nor do they particularly care. They just want a good food, good coffee, good beer, and something authentic. So as they walk into the hotel, there will be a range of different food and beverage offerings that are available to them. And they will then, from our perspective, we're saying, our view would be we are much better to operate that for the owner, for the airport in this instance, because we can deliver something. We should be able to deliver the same level of quality, the same level of experience, the same level of theatre as if that was an outsourced or a leased out venue. But we're able to control that experience so that when people go and caption that, or they've got a great experience or they have a poor experience, that we're able to respond to that and really work through that with the owner and also directly with the guest or with the customer. So for us, we think that it's so critical, if you're an owner of a hotel or an operator of a hotel, that you control that food and beverage experience yourself. You can certainly have a defined area that is a leased out tenancy. We're not saying that that can't occur and that specialty restaurants can't be leased out and operated, and Grant mentioned and talked about Dinner by Heston and opportunities like that. So we see there's absolutely a place for that. But by and large, we do think that the hotel operator needs to be the operator of the food and beverage experience. And we have the capabilities and we have the teams and the skill to be able to deliver that great experience for the guest. So, and economically, it makes more sense to have the one management team and to gain access from a procurement perspective to the benefits that we can bring to the table. So, from both a guest-facing perspective and also from an owning and a commercial perspective, we think the operator is a better place to operate it. But it's something that we do work with owners on, and we continue to have discussions, and we welcome those discussions. And I think it's important because I do think what's happening in the main street, what's happening out there in the marketplace is exciting stuff, and hotel operators absolutely have to keep up with that and have to be at the cutting edge on that piece.
Any other questions for this panel? Yes.
Two questions, actually. First to John. Obviously, you start out with a brief of an exclusive boutique hotel, which you put your artwork and pride and passion to, and then the hotel gets taken over by a big group and then by a bigger group. How does that make you feel as someone who started off doing something very exclusive? And I guess to the panel, when was the last time you took your partner, wife, or spouse out to a hotel for a special occasion for a food and beverage experience?
I got to answer the question. I guess when they our series hotel being sold to a bigger group, they keep the management team for the boutique hotel team, and for what I'm dealing with, still with same people, and Metro actually is that they just talk to the manager, so I don't have much chance to get a dialogue with the bigger group team. And still I deal with same people, so for me would be same. I hope they take the brand more successfully and increase hotel in the world or whatever. It's a good idea for a boutique hotel, unique, different to like a bigger brand and more smaller and more like exclusive a bit more. So how the future the hotel group will be management continue the art concept in the world is really is not in my hands. So it depends who taking over. They got to decide out of it.
Did anybody want to answer the question about do you often take your spouses to stay a night in a hotel for a food and beverage experience?
So probably it was a baby moon, and we went to the Sofitel in Noosa, and we had a great night at the beach house there with Peter Kuravita. So that was probably the last time, and then we've got 2 young kids, so we don't go out at all.
Probably, I suppose when we're travelling more so, we go to a hotel rather than, here within Melbourne, seeing as we live here. So, but we are heading overseas in July, so there will be quite a few hotels that we'll be experiencing in Italy, which will be nice.
I have just recently, probably 2 months ago, take a partner, go to Yarrow Valley, just for stay on the hotel for one night for experience.
It's time.
All right, I'd just like to thank all the panellists for joining us today. You can put your hands together. Thank you.